What's up, Steelers fans? Welcome back to Around the Burgh. I'm Mitchell Wolfe here with my co-host Shayne Kubas, and we are in Spain without the S.
Yeah, that pretty much sums it up pretty good. It's not feeling too great. You're not feeling too great already.
No. So I am the most down bad. So
yeah, for sure.
My weekend starts with Boston College getting drubbed 41-10,
Yeah,
followed
yeah.
up quickly by Steelers losing 41-10, and I'm also sick. So this is my flu game. Gonna do my best to put up a triple double and all that.
Yeah.
But we're here to discuss the Steelers' 41-10 loss to the Bengals, and I feel like this is Stalingrad, this is Midway, this is the turning point. This is where kind of everything changes, and there's no real going back.
Yeah, I mean, this is the type of performance that, like, coming off the run we had been on, minus the Chargers game, obviously, which we kind of tried to sort of push away with, like, okay, well, most of the impactful defense players were out and all that good stuff. We still came back and made a game, all that good stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
But losing to the Bengals the way that we did, it's not just about the fact that the Bengals are no longer the pushover team, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not just the fact that the Browns also, despite their struggles a little bit this year, are no longer that easy pushover team anymore. It's a clear divide between what the Steelers have been for more than a decade and what we currently are. And now what do we do from this point? Like, what decisions are going to be made that are going to impact what it looks like over the next decade or longer?
I'm going to continue with metaphors. This is like when you're dating your high school girlfriend and you try to make it work through the first semester of college, which is just, it doesn't work. It's dumb. It's not a good decision. If you're lucky, you'll make it to Thanksgiving. More likely, you'll make it to Columbus Day.
Yeah.
So, and what that means in this context is that the Steelers really just tried to hold on too long with Ben Roethlisberger and how they thought they acquired talent and developed talent from the top to bottom of this roster. Because I think we'll get into coaching a little later, but I think the biggest thing I want to discuss is just the lack of talent that this roster has. And that's kind of the biggest issue right now, is that there's just not enough talent on both sides of the ball for this roster. The offensive line, yes, there's a lot of injuries, but they're just not good enough right now. They're not good enough to be a winning football team. Ben Roethlisberger, it's not really a talent issue, but at this point, just with his physical and somewhat mental decay, he's not able to be an effective starting NFL quarterback anymore. I would say the offensive weapons are fine. I wouldn't quibble with that. I think Najee is obviously the future of this team. Claypool has had his issues, but there's weapons
talk about
there.
Him too.
Yeah, there's weapons there. On defense, again, injuries have decimated the defensive line outside of Cam Hayward. The whole Melvin Ingram situation is weird. Devin Bush has not progressed or kind of gotten back to his pre-injury form. And I think the way that they've handled the cornerback position has just been a failure. And obviously Joe Hayden was out, but still, it's been a failure.
And that's kind of the problem, right? Is like we're a team at this point that has a few very top end players, right? We're talking TJ Watt, Cam Hayward, Minka when he's on, guys like that. And even, Deontay Johnson to a certain extent is getting to that point where you can start thinking of him like that. But both the depth and then just the players that have to play prominent roles, some of them just clearly are not good enough for us to be a winning football team. That's most of the offensive line. Bush is obviously, you already talked about him. Guys like that just aren't able to play at a high enough level to complement those guys where they can actually make those big impact plays and not have to be the entire reason why we win or lose. Yeah, that's the issue that's really plaguing us right now, is that for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a problem when players like Daniel Archibong, Derek Tuska, Taco Charlton to some extent are getting significant snaps. Henry Mondo, these guys should not be seeing the field on defense. Frankly, They should be special teamers only. Maybe at the back end of games or very specific situations you bring them on field, but these should not be every down players.
Yeah.
And I get they're trying to, TJ is still not fully healthy, it seems, and they need to give him and Alex Highsmith rest. And I know they tried to bring in Ingram to be that rotational guy, and
Just
I
didn't
guess
work
he
out.
just
Yeah.
didn't feel like doing that anymore, which is annoying. But
Yeah.
it's not like he was just going to change his mind again, so they had to move on from him, which sucks at this point. But I mean,
Yeah.
we're Steelers sit at 5-5-1 now. They have a very difficult schedule going down the stretch, and I think at this point it's fair to expect this might be Mike Tomlin's first losing season.
Yeah, I mean, they could very easily, pull something out where they still finish like, 8-1 or something along those lines, like something like that. But this team realistically is a 500 football team, and it is a
At
500
best,
football
yep.
team, right? Like that's where they're at, right?
Hmm.
And it's only because of that top end talent that we are a 500 football team. This isn't one of those things where we're just like an average team all across the board, just no special talents. It's the exact opposite, where we have guys who, if they had the help or the amount of like players beside them that they needed,
Hmm.
would be a playoff caliber football team. But we just don't have those guys.
Yeah, and I think the other issue is that I think especially on offense, they're at the position groups that you can have players that can be transcendent and elevate the players around them. That's where the Steelers are at their worst. The quarterback position, the offensive line. On defense, it doesn't really work as well just because the team works as a unit more so than the offense. But yeah, I mean, at this point, Ben and the offensive line are holding his team back, and the offensive line, it's more so about injuries. BJ Finney's getting significant snaps. If JC Hassenauer was healthy, he'd be getting those reps, which is a problem. So I think let's talk about like a few guys that are kind of, I think we're just confused about. So like you mentioned, we'll talk about Chase Claypool, and he just had some head scratching at best reps today. I missed the first interception, but it seemed like he just didn't really know where he was going, or Ben misfired there or something. I don't really know what
Yeah,
happened.
the way that it looked, just because of how confidently Ben put the ball where it was,
Hmm.
it seemed like him and Claypool just did not read the play the same way.
Okay.
Like Ben was trying to throw that back shoulder type of pass to him, let
Hmm.
him body up Apple, and instead he kept going up the field, and Apple just
Okay.
kind of was right there and intercepted it.
Yeah.
And I think obviously like Claypool's a second year receiver. They're in a new offense together. I don't want to sit here and be like, oh my gosh, that's why Claypool shouldn't, that it sucks that it happened, but this isn't something that's like unheard of for this to happen, right?
Yeah. Like there were a ton of mental
Yeah,
mistakes for him. Like you had the drop. I mean, you had multiple
right.
drops. You had the one you have had multiple times where he just falls down.
Yeah, his
You had
body control is just not there yet
Yeah,
at
which
this
doesn't make
point.
which
Yeah.
is wild. You had the drop on third down where he was open and Ben, double clutched it for an
It should
unknown
have came
reason.
out. It should have came
Right,
out
should have
early.
come out,
Yeah,
and then
for sure.
I can see how that kind of messes Claypool's timing because you're just kind of like
Give me
in
the ball.
between
Like
what you're
actually
supposed
give
to
me
be
the ball.
doing, and then the
Yeah.
ball comes and it's low, and you're like, I don't know what to do. But that he still could have caught it,
It's
and
still,
that's
he still should have been
yeah,
a play he made, but it was made harder by the fact that Ben played it the way he did,
right.
which definitely was frustrating for him.
And
I'm
then
sure.
towards the end of the game, you have him, he makes a big play, and then he starts getting in the face of Bengals players when they're down 30 odd points, and it's just like, dude, you can't be doing this. You got to get your head on straight.
No, yeah, that's just he has to know better than that. Like you're in a position where you're at this point you're playing just to play, right?
Hmm.
This isn't like okay, we're trying to get back in the game or anything like
Hmm.
this. This is just you playing out the string and trying to leave with some sort of positive note. That's not how you do that in this situation. So
Right. And then the other one is Devin Bush. And
yeah,
a lot of people are really down on Devin Bush this year just because he's not reading the defense right. And again, I think part of it is the lack of defensive line talent that's allowing offensive linemen to get to the second level. But he's not taking on blocks. He's not shedding them well. He's not seeing plays. He's not getting downhill quickly. And he's just playing badly. And at one point they benched him, but they had to bring him back out because Robert Spillane got hurt.
hmm
And I do think the Steelers aren't really quick to give up on guys, so I think he'll get a shot next year, and hopefully he'll be back fully from that ACL injury. But it's just not looking good right now.
and I think the problem for him is like this is a player that was selected in the top half of the first round,
Hmm.
right? And as much as linebacker play definitely can be heavily influenced by the defensive line, how well they're freeing them up and everything like that. Like he still has to be better than this,
Yep.
regardless of that. And that's the issue is if he just wasn't making as many impact plays and like tackles for loss and all that stuff, but still getting where he needed to go, fighting through blocks, getting to guys, not trying to limit the damage on some of his
Hmm.
runs. No one could sit here and say, okay, well, he's just terrible, right? Like
Yeah.
he's at least doing what his job is to do. He's not doing that either. and
Mhm.
he's not making any impact plays in the
No.
passing game, or just nothing is going his way in any shape or form. And if you're going to spend a pick as high as we did on him, regardless of the situation, you want to see a lot more out of him than we have, and that's the issue with it ultimately.
Yeah. And then the other one, and this is a little different, but James Pierre,
Yeah,
he just isn't it. It's that
and
simple. I mean,
it just
they
sucks so
just
much.
they just went after him repeatedly with mostly T Higgins, but
Yeah,
pretty much everyone. Like, and he just, I'll give him this on the touchdown to Higgins. He was in good position. It
yeah,
was just a great throw, and I think Pierre lost the ball in the
yeah.
air and couldn't make a play. But like up until him and Pierre really got to each other, he was in good position. But just so many plays where he's just giving so much cushion to Higgins, and like he tackles well and he plays special teams well. I get it, but this guy just can't be a starting cornerback in the NFL, and it is what it is.
It sucks because like I saw glimpses of it from him, like even like in the Broncos game where he had the bad play, but
Hmm.
then he came back and got the interception, and
Hmm.
like you can tell that he has his moments, but he's not playing well enough consistently where you can sit there and say, yeah, he's going to be one of those guys out there next year.
Yeah,
Right, like he's gonna have to either really show some things down the stretch or show up to camp next year and really earn the spot, opposed to just kind of being there because of the cornerback room. Right,
yeah, and
because
I
that's
think
what happened this year for
yeah, and I
sure.
think that this, and maybe this will kind of be our transition into the coaching and front office, is that this was a failure of self scouting and your process because the Steelers coaching staff and front office thought it would be fine for them to move on from Steven Nelson, who granted had some bad games in 2020. It was still a very serviceable corner, especially in a defensive backfield that included Joe Hayden, Minka Fitzpatrick, and Terrell Edmonds, where you can kind of use the other players to protect each other. They move on from Nelson. They're like, okay, like we are comfortable giving James Pierre a lot of these reps, and that was a mistake. And
Yeah,
you know, to expect a UDFA corner to become a starting NFL cornerback is that might just be too high a price. That doesn't usually happen. Mike Hilton did it, but it was very specific, and it was a very specific role that was limited. You know, there are guys like Malcolm Butler, but there's 40 undrafted corners that pop up every year or get signed every year, and maybe one of them turns into a solid role player, like maybe like a Nate Hobbs for the Raiders or something. But to be betting on that is just not a sound strategy.
it's just so hard with playing corner in this league and like the athleticism required to stay with these receivers and the
Hmm.
ball skills. If you want to try to be one of those guys, it's maybe you take some chances, but you at least get some turnovers. Like it's hard to ask a guy that he's not a great athlete. I mean, he's
Yeah.
not. There's a reason why he was undrafted. I
Yep.
mean, I think he is a good coverage player whenever he can stay with the receivers he's playing, but that just doesn't happen that often. I
Hmm.
mean, T. Higgins is not this burner athlete. He's not this guy that's just head and shoulders above him in terms of athleticism, but he still is able to
Yeah.
repeatedly beat
Not
him.
and like not to mention like
Yeah.
let's go back to like as far as we can. Like T Higgins was, I imagine, a 4 or 5 star recruit out of high school.
Yeah.
Played wide receiver at Clemson during their run of elite receivers.
Yeah.
James Pierre was probably a 2 star at most at Florida Atlantic, and he went undrafted because if you're a corner, if you have athletic traits or size, you most likely will get drafted.
Yeah,
And if you
especially
don't
if you
have those
showed
things,
anything like if you showed any amount of technical skills in college,
mhm,
if you show any ability to actually play your technique in college and you have that type of athleticism some of these guys have, you're gonna get a shot somewhere in the draft. It might not be early, but you're getting drafted somewhere.
yeah,
I mean,
and
it
that
just
didn't
is what
happen
it
for him.
is.
So the proof is in the pudding, if you will. And I think that's a big need for, especially considering the Steelers also spent a 3rd round pick on Justin Lane, who, even with all these issues, he can't seem to get on the field on defense,
No.
which is again another failure. But that should transition us into the coaching staff and the front office. And
Yeah.
I want to say that I think I tweeted this out earlier. I think Mike Tomlin is still the right coach for this team. I think he's a great coach. I think if the Steelers did fire him, he would have a head coaching job the next day. With that being said, I think that he needs to evaluate some of his processes, his decision making, and how he prepares this team and the coaches that he's working with, because there are a lot of problems that have been kind of mounting in recent years that have not been addressed. And I think a big one is it kind of comes and goes, but physicality and tackling on defense is one. And I think part of that is just kind of a general NFL issue with the lack of padded practices, but still. And the offense right now, pretty much needs for next year needs to be rebuilt from the ground up. Using guys like Najee, Pat, and Deontay as kind of your building, and Chase Claypool as your building blocks of the future. You need to keep building this offensive line, I guess. If you want to keep sticking with Dan Moore and Kendrick Green and Kevin Dotson, even though I think those are all somewhat dubious propositions, but they need to think about how they're evaluating talent and how they are self-evaluating players that are already in the building. I think they need to clean out a lot of this coaching staff. I think, Keith Butler we've talked about him a lot. He has his issues. Matt Canada has, flashes of interesting stuff, but I just don't think he's cut out for this. And I think there just needs to be a lot of introspection through the end of the season into the off season, because this is the dark times, and that I think we have to accept that.
That was actually one of the things I wanted to get into a little bit. Was now I'm asking this in week whatever it is, 12, I think, right? Of this season, and so maybe things will feel differently a little bit down the stretch or whatever. But if you had to, if you were the one, just based on what you've seen this year, if you were the one who was making this decision, is Butler and Canada gone at the end of this year?
So am I Tomlin in the situation, or am I the Rooneys or Cole?
Well, so assuming Tomlin's still there, obviously. So right. Tomlin's making this decision then in that case, like the hiring of the coaches. Are you getting rid of Butler and Canada, one or the other, or neither?
I'm getting rid of both.
Okay.
I think you can find better OCs than Canada. I think he's been given his chance and it hasn't worked. And I get it. He's been limited by an offensive line and an aging quarterback, but there's just been a lot of times where it's just like, what are we doing? And that's personnel issues, that's schemes, that's play call. It's everything.
Yeah.
It's like I remember it was one of the first plays that I saw on offense where they had Benny Snell and Anthony McFarland in the field, and they were telling Najee to get off the field. And I'm like, what are we doing? Like, how is, and there was a point where, Kalen Ballage dropped a pass, and I get we're trying to save Najee because, he is getting a ton of touches, but this is just ridiculous.
That's the thing, right? Is like, I want to say that I'd like to see what Canada does with a different quarterback and hopefully a better offensive line, because I've seen what he's done in the past successfully with running the football and everything. But at this point, I don't see the upside of it, because realistically, like you said, you could find someone who's capable of doing a better job, even with what we already have. So giving him the chance to possibly mess it up with a new quarterback is really not worth it. And then Butler, for sure. Like, I just clearly
Butler's a holdover from the Cowher days, basically.
Yeah, and it's just at this point, clearly this defense is not playing inspired football. They're not tackling well, like you said. That's just something.
And I think the issue is that the players are cognizant of these issues. Cam Hayward was talking a lot in the post game, we suck right now, and we're mad about it. But if you are mad about it, and this is a prideful franchise, these are prideful players. If nothing is changing and you are still taking that pride in your day to day, that's on the coaches. That's where the problem's originating. And for the longest time, there have been very just easy ways to attack this defense. In 2019, when they were kind of at the peak of their powers, they were great. But every other year, teams have found ways to easily exploit them. And I think there were flashes of good stuff where the Steelers did take away teams' key offensive weapons, but they didn't have the answers to take away those other weapons. And I think we can objectively say 2019 was Keith Butler's best year as a defensive coordinator.
Yeah.
And, I don't think we're ever going to get that back.
I don't think so. And at this point, there's holes on that defense, especially corner. We've talked about that already. And
defensive line.
Yeah. And defensive line between injuries and everything else in general. And even the top players, Watt's obviously been fantastic and he's going to be fantastic. Hayward's been unbelievable. Minka's played his role very well, but it's kind of removed him from that playmaking aspect that was really big for him his first 2 years. And we need to supplement the rest of this defense with players who can legitimately actually fend for themselves and not have to be helped in different ways. And obviously that's going to be the case regardless of who the coordinator is. But you can tell that Butler just doesn't have it as far as getting this team position to win on defense right now.
Excuse me. And yeah, like thinking about corner in the coming years, Joe Hayden's getting up there. I know his contract is coming to an end soon. So, next year the corner's going to be Cam Sutton, James Pierre again with, Arthur Mollett and Trey Norwood as those nickel players. And again, like Norwood has had flashes, but it is as a limited player. And if you can find him a specific role in the defense that does not ask that much of him, he can be successful. But if you're asking him to take significant snaps as a starter and a primary player, that's a problem, especially as a rookie. And so the cornerback room needs to be rebuilt from the ground up. It seems like Edmonds is probably going to walk because they won't have money to pay him, assuming they'll have to pay Minka.
Yeah.
So they'll need a new strong safety, unless they want to move Norwood to free and then move Minka to strong. And that could be interesting, but that's not something I would be the biggest fan of. And then, this defensive line is still a big question mark, even, next year, because you'll have a 35-year-old Tyson Alualu, a 32-year-old Cam Hayward, who is still playing at an elite level, and a Stephon Tuitt who, if he even comes back this year, next year he'll still be another year removed from football. You're not really sure he's had injury concerns throughout most of his career. So, it's a big question, like how much can you really rely on him? And then the back end of the defensive line depth chart is really bad. Isaiah Buggs has flashes, but he's mostly an issue. Isaiah Loudermilk has been a pleasant surprise in limited time. Carlos Davis has had some nice plays, but there's just not enough talent there. And, inside linebacker is another issue. Like we've talked about, Devin Bush has had issues. Joe Sherbert has had some decent plays, but, and Spillane is a limited player. We haven't seen any of Buddy Johnson, really. I'd be interested to see him get some reps towards the end of the year.
I'd hope so. Yeah, I want to see. Because the problem, like you said, is like at this point, I don't know if playing Bush through his struggles is really helping him at all, because it seems like it's just getting worse.
Yeah.
So if he's going to be that bad, like if this is just who he is this year, then giving Johnson a chance to at least come in and play and just see what he looks like. Obviously, it's a rookie. You don't expect a whole lot, but maybe at least as a run defender. He's athletic enough to be a decent run defender. I think that's what his role would be ultimately, eventually. So that would help, hopefully, maybe a little bit in the run defense right now, because it's just atrocious. You just can't, like, there's a difference between like not caring too much about run defense because you're trying to focus on stopping the pass and not being able to stop the run, right? Like that's really the big problem, is if you cannot stop the run, that's when the run defense does matter a whole lot, opposed to just being like, okay, if we're comfortable giving up some run plays, as long as we're not giving up anything in the back end, but we can go stop the run if we have to. This team cannot get stops right now if they want to or not.
Yeah.
And that's just,
At this point, I think the Steelers will be picking in the mid to early teens in the first round. So
as of right now, yeah.
Yeah. And I think there's, like we talked about, there's been a good amount of smoke about bringing a veteran quarterback. I'm not sure what veteran quarterback would want to come to this roster. And again, we've talked about how this quarterback class is bad in the draft. So it's pretty bleak right now. And like we said, the Steelers' schedule does not get any easier down the stretch. They've got the Ravens they've got Ravens next week, at Vikings on a short week, versus Titans, at Chiefs, versus Browns, at Ravens. So you've got, the division leading Ravens twice. You've got the Vikings, who they had some injuries and they lost on the road to the Niners today, but they've been playing a little better. Titans are leading their division even without injuries. I guess they lost the Patriots. Chiefs, who are the Chiefs, and the Browns, who I'm not sure what's going on with their game right now, but that's not going to be an easy out. So I think that it's a realistic possibility that the Steelers don't win another game through the end of the season. I don't think that's the likeliest scenario, but it's possible.
No, but that's the problem that it's possible. There's no gimme games for this football.
The Steelers, they would be lucky to get 3 wins, maybe because the Titans are so banged up, you get them because it's at home and, you win that game. Maybe you get the Vikings because, they have their issues. They're not the best team.
The Vikings just Vikings sometimes.
Yeah. Maybe you get, Ben's last home game against the Browns on a Monday night. You get that one. Maybe you steal one from the Ravens or something. But, like, getting those 3 or 4 wins, the playoffs are not happening. And, I frankly don't really want them to happen right now.
That's the problem, right? And we talked about this when they were 1-3, right? And they're playing more like they have the last couple games at that point. And it was knowing that realistically this team is not bad enough to finish with the top 5 pick, but also I'm afraid that they're not good enough for it to be important to even try to make the playoffs this year. Like, you're going to fall in this weird category of teams, or this weird place draft pick wise, where granted the quarterback class isn't good anyway, so maybe you don't care about trying to be in the top 5, top 10 to get one of those guys. Maybe that's not the route you take, but you're going to miss out on some of the top tier talent, especially if you're trying to improve like the cornerback position, or if you're trying to improve even, linebacker, whatever the case might be, offensive line too. Like, a lot of the guys that maybe would be high level impact players from day one might not be there, or at least the ones you want might not be what we're going to be picking.
Yeah, absolutely. And
yeah.
I mean, so we can jump back into game specific analysis at this point, but I'm not really sure it's worth it, because I mean, the Bengals in the first half, their drives went the following way: touchdown, field goal, touchdown, interception, and after the interception, the next play from scrimmage was a pick six.
Yeah.
So 31-3 at the half, and yeah, I mean, the Steelers had one first down running the ball, just pathetic. 3 turnovers, 2 interceptions from Ben. So the second one was just, he stares down James Washington in the flat and then just has a bad throw out there. It's it's not good at all. But yeah, I mean, it was just a poor performance from basically all involved today.
Yeah, and like with Ben, like we saw last week, like we finally saw a couple glimpses, right, of like, okay, maybe he can, if the protection holds up okay, if the receivers are playing well, maybe he can play well enough to actually give us a chance if the defense isn't perfect, right? And then the defense comes out and plays even worse than they did against the Chargers for the most part. And this time Ben lays an egg, and so does the entire offense. And now this is more like what this team actually is, unfortunately. And that's the problem is, I mean, the win streak they went on, is great, right? They snuck out wins, but you could tell, and we even mentioned it a couple of times, like you could tell this wasn't what this team is. They're not a 4 or 5 winning streak in a row type of team. And we were making it work, but you can only make it work so long until the dam breaks. And if the dam didn't break last week, it definitely did this week.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
And that's nothing to take away from the Bengals. I mean, they've been much improved this year. They've especially just the way that the offensive line is played compared to what I expected them to play. They're not great, but they're more than good enough. They're not actively jeopardizing their offense. And the defense for them, I mean, they've had a couple hiccups obviously here and there, but especially against us this year and just teams that don't have great offenses, they've been able to really clamp down and give the offense a chance to take the game. And we're not going to look this bad against every team we play against the rest of the year. But if we look anything like we did on defense, there's no way this offense can stay with anybody.
Yep. And I mean, we do you want to do 3 stars? Because I mean, it's kind of the usual suspects, I would say.
I mean,
it's Cam first star, Deontay second star, Minka third star for getting his first pick, which ultimately meant literally nothing.
Nothing at the time. I mean, it's good play, but it's like this is the type of game though where it's like everybody goes in the locker room and it doesn't matter how good or bad you individually played, no one can be happy about it, right? Like nobody's saying like, well, I mean, at least we did. It's like, no, we did nothing.
Yeah, there's no silver linings here.
We accomplished nothing. Like this isn't. I really am not a big person, and I don't believer in like moral victories or like losing a game and still but you can still take away positives a lot of the time from losses, especially close ones. Like last week, the offense finally looked okay, right? Like we're like, okay, well at least they proved that they could actually get some drives together and do some stuff. This is a game where you pretty much have to throw it away and be like, this just doesn't mean anything. Like we accomplished nothing. We know exactly what happened. We don't have to dwell on it. And hopefully they can take that and turn it into something the rest of the year and use it for some motivation. But just the talent level at certain positions, like we talked about in the beginning, it just isn't there. And I don't see that it's not going to change this year, obviously, and it's not going to get any better anytime soon.
Yep, absolutely. So, all right, my voice is going. I'm back to being in pain. So we're gonna end it here just because I can't go on any further.
Yeah, and frankly, I don't think we want to go any further.
That too.
We'll have plenty of time to talk about how this rest of the season goes and what we do. Maybe we'll get to do what we ultimately are going to want to do anyway. Later in the year and start talking about some potential draft prospects, maybe perhaps
That's
stuff
best
like that.
time. Best time of the
Yeah.
year. All right.
You're right. That'll be
So,
fun. But
like I said, we're gonna end it here. We'll be back later this week to preview next week's game. In the meantime, Shayne, let people know they can find you and your work.
other than in the corner while I cry about what is probably going to happen in the next few weeks. You can find me at Shayne Kubas on Twitter as always, and also other than most of the second half, or really the second half of this week, where I just basically said peace out on the Steelers ATB Twitter. You also find us there for the most part. Hopefully, more stuff to talk about than just getting shellacked in the first half, but that's where you can find me right now.
Yep. All right. And you find me at Mitchell T. Wolfe, WOLFE on Twitter. Make sure you're following Around the Block on all platforms, YouTube, Twitch, ATB Steelers. Thanks for tuning in, and then we'll see you on our next episode.